Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I am your host Faiza Naqvi with the prayer. May Allah bless you all with long, healthy, blessed life and increase your tawfiqat care. And may Allah hasten the appearance of Imam of our time as soon as possible, inshallah. Today the topic we are about to discuss is related to FIFA World Cup. What are the lessons we are going to learn out of it? And Sheikh Ali from Bahrain, whose illegal detention has its anniversary yesterday. It's been like 8 years now. He's in illegal detention from the authorities, and no one is taking any action about it, and no one is bothered about the human rights over there in Bahrain. So we will talk about it in further detail, and we have a wonderful guest with us to talk about the topic, and we will move on to our guest. We have Sister Sundasul Asad from Lebanon. She is journalist, and brother Zafar Bangish from Canada. He is with us, and we'll move on to our guest. Assalamu alaikum, brother Zafar. I'm really grateful for your time, and it's really honor to have you. And Sister Sundar, thank you so much for joining us today on this important topic. First of all, I would like to ask why ask something. First of all, Sister Sundar, I would move on to you because you are also looking at this topic very deeply and very much connected to this, issue as well. So I would like to ask, what is reason behind Sheikh Ali detention? And it's been 8 years since he is in illegal detention, and why there are no actions has been taken for his coming out of the jail and all that. So how do you see that, and what's the problem behind it?
Okay, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First, I express my condolences on the martyrdom of Sayyid Zahra alayhi salam. Second, on this occasion of the 80th anniversary of the arbitrary detention of Sheikh Ali Salman, I express my solidarity with this great leader and with the oppressed Bahraini people. Actually, Sheikh Ali Salman has been imprisoned merely because he has called the rights of his people. Sheikh Ali Salman is well known for his peaceful action. He is a moderate leader. He is well known and appreciated by various nations around the globe. He hasn't incited hatred against anybody, even although you know that the brutality of the Bahraini regime. But Sheikh Ali Salman has been focusing and trying hard to call and urge the Bahraini government to respect the rights of the people and not to consider them as second-class citizens. The Bahrainis, as you know, are marginalized, are denied equal rights. They are denied job. They are denied the very basic rights. So in 2011, as everyone knows, the Bahrainis kicked off to the streets. They called for these rights. They called for reforms, but unfortunately, the government suppressed them. The government murdered them with the help of the Saudi army, with the help of the GCC troops. They were imprisoned, they were tortured, they were exiled. There are a lot of violations that have been committed since 2011. So Sheikh Ali Salman, at that critical time, incite hatred and incite a sectarian strife. Sheikh Ali Salman was insisting that this would drive Bahrain to various critical and dangerous crises. He tried hard to call the government to take further measures, actual and effective measures toward reforms, toward giving the people their rights. But unfortunately, the government ignored him, ignored his calls, despite being very peaceful calls. And if you take a look on Sheikh Ali Salman's speeches, you will see that he all the time warned the people not to be driven to violence, not to be driven to the sectarian rhetoric. In all of his speech, he addressed the Sunnis before the Shias. He called them, "You are our brothers. We love you. We care about your interests. We care about your future generations. Our movement is not a movement for the Shias. It's a movement for all the Bahraini citizens." But unfortunately, the government denied these calls. So at that time, the GCC and the American and the US embassy in Bahrain uh, were trying to make a mediation in order to settle the crisis. And at that time, the Qatari Prime Minister called Sheikh Ali Salman in order to make a settlement or to resolve the crisis that is hitting Bahrain at that time. And this call it was open and everyone known about it and was announced in news and in public. After 7 years, when the Bahraini regime boycotted the Qatari regime, at that time, the regime remembered that call and used it against Sheikh Ali Salman in order to accuse him of trying of collaborating with the Qatari regime in order to clamp down against the Bahraini regime, which is very ridiculous and very something no one can trust, or no one can use it as an evidence against Sheikh Ali Salman. But unfortunately, this is the Bahraini regime, a regime that has no ethics, a regime that at the main time is making dialogue and has normalized ties actually openly with the Zionist enemy, but failed to dialogue and to listen to this man who cared about the interests of all Bahrainis. Sheikh Ali Salman is behind bars because he has peacefully and honestly called for reforms, called for the rights of his people. He rejects any calls for armed struggle. He is a very peaceful man, and this is not my assessment. You can look at the various international reports that have been issued since 2011, which insist that Sheikh Ali Salman is a political prisoner, and Sheikh Ali Salman is in prison because of his political opinion. Sheikh Ali Salman was once a representative in the Bahraini parliament and has been trying hard to reform his country, to reform the affairs of Bahrain, to save the sovereignty of Bahrain, to make Bahrain an independent state, not like what Bahrain today has become, a Zionist settlement. Unfortunately, Bahrain today is turning into a hub of terrorizing the people of West Asia and to threatening their safety and their peace. So the main reason of Sheikh Ali Salman being in prison, the main reason of incarcerating Sheikh Ali Salman, is that because Sheikh Ali Salman has peacefully and sincerely called for an elected government, called for an effective parliament, and called for the rights of all the Bahraini people. That's why Sheikh Ali Salman is arbitrarily detained in the Bahraini notorious prisons.
I'll get back to you, sister Sundas, and I'll move on to brother Safar. How do you see the, brother, Sheikh Ali Salman imprisonment, and how we can help him to, like, he should be released, and it's been 8 years for an injustice detention he is in. So how do you see the word hypocrisy and the word human rights organizations hypocrisy, and how the word is Bahrain is becoming a Zionist colonial place, you can say. So, what are your thoughts on that, and how we can help our people in these issues which are related to purely human rights and which are purely related to injustice around the globe, and the people are suffering because of that?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this program. With
Yeah,
respect
you're
to the imprisonment of Sheikh Ali Salman for more than 8 years now, it is obvious that the regime in Bahrain, which does not represent the interests of the Bahraini people at all, it is, as our sister pointed out, become a Zionist colony. It had been for decades an American colony. America maintains its naval base. The Fifth Fleet is based in Bahrain. And I think we need to be clear in our minds that neither the United States nor its allies, whether in the West or in the region, are going to do anything about the rights of the Bahraini people, because this regime that is in power in Bahrain is serving the interests of the American imperialists and the illegitimate entity in occupied Palestine, the Zionist entity. So that's one aspect of it. The other, of course, is the issue of the silence or the virtual silence of human rights organizations in the world. Now, it has been our experience, and we have observed that these human rights organizations uh, only take action or take notice when, if let's say, a particular government is in power that the West does not like, then these human rights organizations come into action. And if the people that are struggling for their rights, as they are in Bahrain, their basic fundamental right to be able to vote for a government of their choice, then this kind of struggle is ignored because the regime in Bahrain is serving the interests of the imperialists and the Zionists. Now, with respect to the third question as to what we can do, obviously it is incumbent upon us, those of us that care about human rights, those of us that want human dignity and want people's rights to be respected, and that governments should represent the wishes of their people, then it becomes incumbent upon us that we raise our voices and draw the attention of people in the societies where we are living. Now, I know that there are millions and millions of Muslims that live in Western societies, whether it is in North America or Europe or Britain, uh, France, Germany, etc. It then becomes incumbent upon us that we begin to not only begin, but that we must consistently raise our voices for the Bahraini people, for their leaders that are incarcerated, like Sheikh Ali Salman, at the same time as we consistently raise our voices for the oppressed people of Palestine, or we raise our voices for the oppressed people of Kashmir and other places, I think it is very important that we don't forget our brothers and sisters struggle in Bahrain for their fundamental rights. So we can make a difference by becoming proactive, by aligning with other fair minded people in the societies where we live. For instance, I live in Canada. There are many Canadians who are not Muslims, but they still care for human rights and human dignity. And we have been able to link up with them to raise our voices for the oppressed people of Bahrain. And I think one final point, at least as far as Muslims are concerned, that they can uh, create awareness in their mosques and Hussainiyas by raising the issue of the suffering of the Bahraini people and linking it with the struggle of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Ahlul Bayt, how they struggled for their rights and the methods that they use, that we can also adopt these methods in order to create greater awareness.
Sisters Sundus, moving on to you, I would like to ask you, how is Sheikh Ali Salman at the moment? What are what is his condition? Obviously, when they are in such imprisonments which are illegal and detentions, so then people are suffering in different ways. So, and how about his family and what kind of demands they have? Obviously, one is the unconditional release, but obviously, what else do you think is supposed to be known by the people who are listening to you regarding Sheikh Ali Salman, Bahraini people, their rights, and what are the difficulties and hindrances in between this release and these rights?
Okay.
Well, you see,
So
unless sorry,
Yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead, sister.
It's all right if you want to answer. You can answer as well. But sister, I come back to you on the same question, but I'll take the view of Brother Zafar as well. So, what do you? You can share your viewpoint on that as well. It's fine.
okay, no worries.
Go ahead. Sorry, sister, go ahead, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay, so yes, before answering your question, sister, I want to thank the brother for highlighting this great issue, which is as we know, we are commemorating the martyrdom of Sayyidah Zahra. We remember something which is so significant and so important in the life of Sayyidah Zahra, which is at that critical time, Sayyidah Zahra was in when everyone were against them in that society. Now, the Shia around the globe, I believe that they have many things to do in order to do something for the oppressed people, for our oppressed nations. It's our duty, as he mentioned that in Canada, in the U.S., in Europe, we in Lebanon, as we can, the Bahrainis are suffering, the Yemenis are suffering, the Shias in Qatif are suffering, our brothers in Syria are still suffering. We know, I have mentioned previously that the sanctions that are enforced against us in Lebanon. Many people are oppressed, especially here in West Asia. It's our responsibility, it's our duty, it's our obligation to raise their voice, to be their voice. Okay, it's the lesson that we learn from Sayyid al-Zahra. It's jihad al-tabyin, as Sayyid al-Qa'id Ali al-Khamenei has labeled it. It's our duty to clarify and to be it and to raise their message, to raise their suffering, to tell to tell the people around, as brother mentioned, that not all the Westerns are with their regimes and with their administrations. There still are good people who can stand in solidarity with us. So, regarding your question, as you know, the Bahraini prisoners are notorious, and they uh, they lack basic necessities. We have learned a lot and listened a lot about these prisons. Sheikh Ali Salman has been in prison for 8 years now. During Corona, for 2 years, during the COVID-19 infection, uh, he along with the other prisoners of conscience weren't able to see their families. Also, there's a point that the prison administration insists on putting a kind of glass barrier between them and their families. Can you imagine, sister, then that they can't touch their children, they can't hug their moms, they can't connect with them physically. So that it's quite heartbreaking. Sheikh Ali Salman hasn't met his family for 8 years now. Okay, he has become a grandfather. His elder son has got married, and he has become a grandfather while in prison. His younger daughter was only for 40 days when he was imprisoned. She hasn't met her father for those entire 8 years.
But
Last
this is the basic human right that people, even if they are in detention or in prison, they can
Yes,
still meet their loved ones. So why
unfortunately,
is
this
nothing
regime
happening?
that claim that it respects human rights denies those political prisoners their basic rights, which is against the basic humanitarian international laws, which are known by Nelson Mandela rules. They violate these rules and violate the rights of these prisoners, those prisoners of conscience. Yesterday, it has been circulated on social media a video of Sheikh Ali Salman. This video, it's actually a heartbreaking video. In this video, the mother of Sheikh Ali Salman, I believe she is in her 80s. She was. You can't imagine that despite the pain and despite the absence of her son, she was expressing pride in his son. She called him, "You are my hero. You are a crown on my head. I am proud of you and of your sacrifices. Everyone needs you." Can you imagine that how this the steadfastness of this mother, and that's is really why we have great leaders, because it's the mother. And I was mentioning previously the example of Sayyidah Zahra teach us how to resist, and also teach us as women how to prepare uh, great leaders, and how to educate our children to hold the banner of calling for rights and of facing the oppressed. Just like Sayyidah Zahra has prepared Imam al-Hassan, the example of Imam al-Hassan, and the example of Imam al-Hussein, the example of Sayyidah Zainab, the mother of Sheikh Ali Salman is just like Sayyidah Zahra. She has followed her example. And this is our duty as mothers, is to follow this example. It's our duty to prepare children who care about human everywhere around the globe, not only Shia. We don't call for the to stand in solidarity with every oppressed around the globe. It's our duty to be their voice, to raise their principles, to be just like them.
That's true. Brother Azafar, if you want to add something more about it, and can you shed some light on the, West Asia, for instance, why the most of the people who are in suffering, like politically, culturally, or in wars and stuff like that, if you see, it's in Iraq, in Shah, in Syria, in Bahrain, in these kind of places which are which have the population of Muslims mostly. So how do you think, why is that happening, and why we can't get that justice. I mean, even though it's been 70 years, even for like Kashmir, for instance, we are raising voice and all that, and we are talking about Palestine from past above maybe 70 years. So and now obviously from past many years, it's in Bahrain, which is whatever is happening. So what do you think? Why we can't reach to that level? Why these places can't get justice? Why people are in suffering mode in these places? What is the core reason behind?
Understanding of the global situation and how various countries around the world operate. I know that many countries, particularly in the West, the governments and regimes, etc., talk about human rights, but they don't practice human rights. When you, for instance, look at the example of the United States, which is the greatest perpetrator of violence against people worldwide, we see that America is involved in wars in different parts of the world. And there are many reasons for that. Number one, that there are, for instance, governments that refuse to submit to American demands or to become American colonies. Number two, there are countries that have certain natural resources that the United States and the West wants, and so they target those countries as well. And then we have the situation whereby America is involved in competition with countries like China and Russia. And so any countries that have friendly relations with, let's say, China and Russia are targeted. So we need to be very clear in our minds that while these Western governments predominantly, obviously because they are the ones that are most influential in the world today, that they may talk about human rights, but they don't practice them. Their concern for human rights is selective. So, for instance, even when the Zionists are killing the Palestinian people, we hear very little of any concern being expressed from these Western regimes. In fact, on the contrary, what we constantly hear whenever the Zionists attack the Palestinian people, that almost every Western government immediately comes out with this ridiculous excuse that's to say, well, the Israelis have a right to defend themselves. I mean, this is so incredible that the Palestinians are getting killed, and yet they keep on claiming that Israel has the right to defend itself, as if the Palestinians do not have a right to defend themselves. Look at the situation in Yemen. The poor Yemenis have suffered for more than now almost 7 years now. The Saudis have launched a brutal campaign against them. They are murdering Yemeni people. They are being besieged. Children are being killed. There is a cholera epidemic. Even the United Nations itself, the United Nations Human Rights Council, and others have said that more than 1 million Yemeni children have been affected by cholera. They've also said that almost 90% of the Yemeni population is food deficient. And yet there is absolutely no or little action taken against the Saudis. Instead, the Saudis are being armed to the teeth by the Americans, the British, the French, and other Western regimes, even though they know that the Saudi regime is a terrible regime. And if you look at the situation in Bahrain, obviously Bahrain is a smaller entity, it's only about 1 million people, and yet, since the regime is totally aligned with the Americans and the Zionists, therefore, the suffering of the Bahraini people are completely ignored. And of course, as our sister mentioned, the prisons in Bahrain are terrible. They are, the prisoners are badly tortured over there. They are humiliated. They are persecuted for no crime except to say that they should have their basic rights. This is a fundamental right that is even enshrined in the United Nations Charter. But again, I'd like to point out that the United Nations Charter and any of these other international treaties and laws, etc., are only there on paper. They are not applied in terms of the suffering of the people. They are only brought out or trotted out when, if there is, let's say, a government that goes against the wishes of the imperialist West and the Zionists, then a lot of pressure is exerted on them. As we see, for instance, in Syria or in the Islamic Republic of Iran, which insists on remaining independent of these imperialist powers, and it has suffered tremendously as a consequence of sanctions and all kinds of other propaganda, of sabotage, of assassinations, of all kinds of other cruel activities that have been inflicted upon the Islamic Republic of Iran because it insists on remaining independent. But I don't want to sound pessimistic. What I want to say is that I think the global situation is changing, and it's changing towards the oppressed people's rights, because there are now other powers, other power centers that are emerging, including Russia and China, in which I believe that the Islamic Republic of Iran does play a significant role because it has become the epicenter of resistance. So there is a resistance movement that has emerged in the region, in the broader Middle East, which is beginning to change the dynamics. And I'm quite hopeful that, inshallah, in the not too distant future, we should be able to see significant changes in the condition of the people that are under oppression. And I hope and pray that the people that are suffering, that they continue to not lose hope and continue to resist their occupiers, so that they can achieve their goals and their legitimate rights.
Here, I do have one question with you, Zafar Bhai. That do you think we are doing enough to reach out the other communities in order to share our viewpoint of, for example, peace, justice, our own cultural values, and stuff like that, so that they could, because obviously, if we see around the globe, the media is under control of these Zionist people, or the people who are like related to imperialists. So how do you think we can change the viewpoint of the common people, because they obviously see and watch just media, and media is under control, and they show and they create only those opinions which are obviously helpful for them. So how do you see that? Are we doing enough as community, especially the people who are living in West, and they are reaching out to other communities and help educating them as well? Like, okay, these are the issues of on ground, and these are real and genuine human rights problem, and these are not being shown on the media. Obviously, these are just on ground. So, are we doing enough in that regard?
Obviously, a lot more needs to be done. Uh, I believe whatever we have done or we do is not enough, because the suffering of the people worldwide, of Muslims in many parts of the world, are immense. And definitely we need to increase our efforts. And in this regard, what I would also like to say is that uh, I think we should not put any faith in the Western media, or the corporate media as it is called, to represent our point of view. In fact, their aim is to distort everything about the legitimate rights and grievances of the oppressed people of the world. It's not just Muslims, incidentally. We need to keep in mind that, for instance, people in Venezuela are suffering. People in Cuba are suffering. They're not Muslims. They are Christians by and large, and yet they are subjected to these horrific crimes because those people or their governments stand up for the rights of their people against the bullying of the imperialist powers. So what we can do is, number one, as I said earlier, that we reach out to the common man in the street, whether it is in Canada, the United States, Europe, etc. Reach out to them, because there are many good people. This has been my experience living here in Canada. We interact with mainstream Canadians, and we have found that there are human rights organizations, there are peace activists, there are people who are there are anti-war activists, there are anti-poverty activists that are willing to work with us. They need to, that want to hear about our situation so that they are better informed, that they can begin to uh, join hands with us. The second point that I think is important, and I think this is something that your TV program is doing, that we as Muslims need to develop our own media outlets. Living in the West, now it has become quite easy to be able to run a TV program. All one needs is to have a little bit of, to be internet savvy and to be able to use the technology in order to project our point of view. And I think it is possible that with this kind of information, that we put it out and we, uh, get our point of view across to the people. I think this can have a positive impact. So I think a lot more can be done. The question is of being aware, and this awareness can be created through media platforms that, for instance, you have, or we run Crescent International News Magazine, and other kinds of activities. And I think these are the kinds of things that can increase awareness, and that can then help to mobilize people to support justice, fundamental human rights, and peace in the world.
Mm. Sister Sundus, how would you add your comment on that point? Like, for example, if we see, media and all that, we do have some kind of religious media, maybe a little bit, but not as such, which is practically doing dealing with the our news. For instance, news which are based on truth, justice, and human rights generally, and which are not money making people or something like imperialists or some kind of people like that. So how do you see that, and anything more you would like to add regarding Sheikh Salman, because we are moving towards the end of the show and we need to address our other part as well. So if you can comment on that, and we can then move on to the next part.
Yes, I believe that yes, we have to find an alternative media to reach those people, to show them the atrocities that are being committed by their governments, and how the money they are paying by taxes, or the money they are paying are manipulated to kill us in West Asia and to oppress us illegally. So I believe, yes, that it's our duty to move on from the defensive mode to the mode of trying to be in the center of these communities, to tell them, to show them evidence, to work whatever in whatever the activities, and to organize events to show them how our people are being killed, how our people are being tortured, are being driven into they are being starving them to into starving them, and leading them into impoverment, uh, into poverty, and being victims of their sanctions. It's our duty to find these outlets, to manipulate them in order to let them know about the grievances of our people and the plights of our people here in West Asia. The grievances of the Bahrainis, the grievances of people, of leaders, of honest leaders like Sheikh Ali Salman, of the grievance of the Yemenis, the grievance of the Lebanese, the Palestinians, also as brother has mentioned, the Cubans, every person who is suffering around the globe. It's our duty to be their voice, to help them in any possible means that can really make a change.
That's really true. Brother Jafar, I would move on to you and would like to ask that, how do you see the FIFA World Cup? Like, obviously, there was so much ongoing in that World Cup, and it was just not mere a World Cup. It was kind of first time in Islamic State, one of the Islamic states, it was happening, and it was very much controversial on different reasons. And we have seen always. West is trying to teach Muslims, or you can say the other people, like you. This is, for example, right, and this is illegal, and this is legal, and this is human right, and this is something. Why do they? Who are they to teach others? Like, for instance, that this is something they think is right for the other communities as well, because obviously it might not be. So how do you see that controversy during, and what kind of controversies you think are really important to understand and reflect upon, which we have observed during the World Cup 2022?
because it highlights the uh, cultural imperialism aspect of the West. Basically, there is a notion, particularly among Western governments and their media, that somehow their norms and their values are universal values. Let me give you specific examples. For instance, one of the objections that was raised at the beginning was that Qatar is not allowing beer and alcohol inside the stadiums. Now, I recall when I was a student in England back in the 70s, I used to see on television when these football matches used to take place between various teams, whether it was Manchester United or Chelsea or whatever. Their particular fans would not only drink inside the stadiums, but they would begin to fight against each other, throwing beer bottles at each other, smashing people's heads, and then they come out and they indulge in other vandalism and other kinds of antisocial behavior. And obviously, Qatar, as a predominantly, overwhelmingly Muslim country, rightly did not allow alcohol to be served inside the stadium. Although regrettably, they had places outside where alcohol was served. Although I would have thought that a Muslim country would not allow that, because that is part of what Islam teaches us. Yet they allowed that. There was still objection that Qatar is not allowing alcohol and beer inside the stadium. I want to point out France is a non-Muslim country. It has all kinds of strange and idiotic values, and yet even France forbids the sale of alcohol and beer inside the stadiums because they see the kind of damage that these vandals would then cause if they consume these kinds of things inside the stadium. Number two, the other issue that was brought up was, and it was quite important, and this is the so-called rights of LGBTQ, whatever, as if to say these kinds of values are universal values and everybody else has to accept them. I think these societies are actually committing suicide. They don't realize what they are doing. They are ruining their own lives and they are imposing these kinds of values on Muslims and other people. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the people in the world do not believe in adopting the kinds of lifestyle that these Western countries are imposing on them. And in any case, these Western values are not static, they're not consistent, they are moving and changing all the time. So, for instance, if you look at, I'll give you the example of Canada. Until the year 2005, marriage was defined as between a male and a female. And it was only under pressure from these groups that it was changed in 2005 that they said marriage is between any two consenting adults. This was in Canada. In other countries, similar sort of, movements have taken place. Regrettably, they're now even imposing these things on young children in schools as young as 5 years old. They're telling them that it's okay to have a man marry another man or a woman marry another woman. I mean, this is incredible that they not only do they want to practice these things themselves, they want to impose it on other people. When we look at the statistics, only 5% of the world's population maybe perhaps believe in gay, lesbian rights or whatever. If these people want to commit, genocide, social genocide in their own societies, that's their choice. But we don't have to accept them. I mean, after all, what about our human rights? What about our values? If we don't want to accept their values, why should they be imposing them on us? And this was turned into a major issue in Qatar. They were constantly harping on this as if the World Cup was not about soccer, it was about LGBTQ rights. And so these are the kinds of idiotic things that these people do, these people indulge in, and then they want to impose them on other people. We should take a firm stand on this and say, our religion teaches us that there is a different lifestyle. It's perfectly fine, it is working. There are no problems in our societies, unlike these Western societies. So why should we have to adopt something that is going to create problems for us? If these people want to create problems for themselves, we would say don't, but that's their choice.
Hmm. That's really, you have rightly pointed out these things. Obviously, if they want to do, suicide is their choice. Why they, who they are to impose on others, obviously. How do you see, sister, this kind of controversy which has happened in the Qatar, and when we see that Western people who always have a very, media based view of Muslim culture and all that, or society and all that, but when they exposed to a Muslim culture, they said they have seen that people who are Muslim, players who are playing and winning or even losing, they are thanking God, and they are respecting their mothers and elders and fathers, and hugging them and respecting them, and they are very respectful to their families instead of their obviously girlfriends or something. So how do you see this kind of exposure which Western people had in Qatar, and what kind of issues do you think is really important for us to understand from this World Cup, which was highly politicized and controversial in many ways, through these kind of LGBT slogans and stuff like that. They wanted to impose their cultural values, and everyone was showing some kind of their own, a connection to their values in some way. So, how do you see that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. I believe that the event itself, it was not the efforts of the Qatari regime, but of the people, the Muslim and the Arab people there in the World Cup have been playing a very great role in exposing the true and the genuine Islamic values. Here we must mention something that in the recent years, the Islam that has been exposed to the West was the Wahhabi Islam, the distorted vision of Islam, which has nothing to do with Islam. At the World Cup, Muslim has been trying to show many genuine, lofty values of Islam. First of them is their respect to the value of the family, their respect for others. It's according to the ayah, to the Quranic verses that وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا. We have making you different nations in order to get introduced to each other. Those people have shown true tolerance, the true Islam. Also, they have shown something which is quite important, and it's not the Qatari role, the official Qatari role in showing their solidarity with Palestine and showing their rejection for normalization. The Qatari regime has allowed the Zionists to come to the Mondial and to the World Cup, but the people there, the Muslims and the Arab, shown their rejection for normalization. They have shown their rejection for anything that is called Zionism, anything that is related for this occupation, this illegal regime that has been implemented in our region. It's quite important and it's quite significant to show that it was the role of the people. We don't, no one ignore or forget the vision Qatar has played against Syria. They have devastated Syria. We have lost a lot of our beloved sons as martyrs in Syria because of the vicious Qatari role. So it was the people who have shown during the World Cup the true Islamic values, the Islamic of solidarity with others, the values of respecting others, and the values of hospitality of the Muslims. It's quite And that is related to the idea that we have been dissecting previously, that it's our duty wherever we are, whatever capabilities we have, is to show the true Islam that cares about humanity, that care about true and genuine peace, which the Prophet and the Holy Bait have taught us.
That's so true. Brother Zafar, how do you see the act of, there are so many people who were obviously representing Iran in positive way, and there was some, like, for example, if we look at the Saucer team who didn't wanted to recite, for example, their own national anthem in solidarity with, for example, Western values or Western propaganda, whichever way you take it. So, how do you see that hypocrisy of that team and the people of that kind of mindset who are like always are influenced by the Western media, their propagation, and they don't even understand the real value of Islamic, obviously, based on Islamic values. They don't understand that value, and they just want to like impress, for instance, those Western people and Western authorities and stuff like that. So, how do you see that hypocrisy, and how do you see the other people who were in favor of their own values and they respected them enough, and they showed, strong respect to their own values, their action during the World Cup as well?
Well, I think that what you mentioned, this particular episode clearly demonstrates how the Western media depicts various events. So, for instance, we know that in September there were some disturbances that were actually engineered disturbances. The riots that were instigated in the Islamic Republic of Iran were instigated from outside, and now there is ample proof. A number of people have been arrested. These are agents, so dual nationals of Britain and France and other countries that have been involved in instigating trouble inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. And when what we witnessed in Qatar was that there were a lot more people in support of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Islamic system in Iran, and a tiny minority that were mesmerized by the West. These are West toxicated people that worship the West, that hate Islamic values. These are people that have very little to do with Islam. They are just full of hatred for Islam, and that's why they commit these horrible atrocities over there. And yet, the Western media was constantly projecting these handful of people and ignoring the vast majority of the people of Iran who were in Qatar in solidarity with their own team and with their own government. And this also is a reflection of exactly what has been going on in Iran. And when I was looking at the depiction, for instance, on BBC or CNN or these other Western media outlets, they would show these rioters from close up. So, I mean, this is a trick that is used in media projection, that when the people are small in number, you show them from close up so they appear a large number of people. But in fact, these rioters were going around burning government buildings, burning mosques, blowing up people inside mosques. They were attacking ambulances and setting them on fire. They killed security personnel. They slaughtered them in the streets, slitting their throats in the street. It was all filmed. And yet the Western regimes are supporting these criminals as if they were struggling for their rights. I mean, I want to ask, which country, which government in the world would allow people to go around burning buildings, destroying banks, killing soldiers and police officers in the streets? Which government would allow that? And yet somehow they say, oh, these people are struggling for their rights. The rights does not mean you go and kill people. Rights means, okay, if you have certain legitimate grievances, you express them. And the people of Iran have perfect liberty, complete liberty to do so. But when there were literally millions of our sisters that came out in hijab, in support of hijab, they were completely ignored. They were not really covered by the mainstream Western media. The alternative media, of course, provided certain coverage to that, but the mainstream media simply did not. And there are all kinds of other, idiotic allegations made against the Islamic Republic of Iran. But to come to the
Uh,
issue of the World Cup in Qatar and how it was presented, it was interesting that when they the coach of Iran's team was constantly being questioned about the riots taking place in Iran. He got so exacerbated, and he said, this was a BBC reporter. He told that woman, he said, would you please go and ask Southgate? That Southgate, of course, is the name of the coach for in the English team. He said, could you please go and ask him what the British did in Afghanistan in murdering tens of thousands of people? Would you please do that for me? And of course, that BBC reporter was not going to do that. So you see, when these people go and kill millions of people around the world, in fact, there have been studies done. There is an Australian professor, Gideon Polya, who has done a study who says that since 2001, America and its allies have killed more than 32 million people worldwide, either through direct
hmm.
wars or through sanctions or through prohibiting medicines from reaching the people or through all kinds of other means, that they have killed 32 million people around the world. This is genocide of Muslims that has taken place. And yet you wouldn't find this kind of information in the Western media. They just completely ignore it. They think that obviously the West has the right to go and kill people. And yet, when you find that in Iran there were these rioters killing people, innocent people, uh, they were destroying property, the West was supporting them. And so what we saw in Qatar was specifically this Western agenda, Western imperialist agenda, imposing their values and their information on others, whereas in fact, the people of Iran, to their credit, the vast majority stood in support of their football team as well as of the system of governance in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Therefore, by we are heading towards the end of the show. So, sister, I just have 2-3 minutes left. So, I just want your, viewpoint on the point Brother Zafar has mentioned. Do you think the next World Cup, which will be in 2026, I guess, so they will be having those slogans like war crimes against America and the kind of bans we need? We will be able to see such like Black Lives Matter, or you can say Me Too armbands, sort of things in next World Cup, or the genocide and human rights. All the human rights violations they have done through their war crimes. We would be seeing such kind of slogans in next World Cup. Do you think that?
Unfortunately, one who follows history and knows the history of those colonialist powers knows that they don't uh, care about human rights. They don't care about our grievances. What what we are concerned about is what we are concerned about is about the arrival of our true Savior, Imam al-Mahdi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and Jesus Christ, inshallah. That's our only hope. He's the only hope of every Muslim person. And at that time of awaiting this Savior, it's our duty to make our best to prepare the ground for this Imam to appear and to save all the oppressed people around the globe.
Thank you so much, Sister Sundasul Asad. It is the end of the show, and Sister Sundasul Asad is a journalist from Lebanon. She joined us today. Brother Zafar Bangish has joined us from Canada. I'm really grateful for both of them. And just to to the viewers, I would say we should always seek justice, truth, and we should work towards that, and we should increase our knowledge, and we should work for truth and justice. With this message, I'll take a leave, and then we'll see you inshallah next week. Allah Hafiz.